Howdy, and welcome back to the Big Jake podcast. Glad you're joining us. It's Easter Sunday, April 9th. Glad that you are with us. Got some fun stuff planned for you today. Got some fun stories, and we'll get into it. We'll start with a little recent comedy news. So this week, I was able to go back to the Louisville Comedy Club. Haven't been there in a few weeks, and did the Sunday showcase. I did that last Sunday. It was a good time. I enjoyed it. The other comedians didn't seem to like it as much as I did, but whatever. I thought it was fine, and it's always a fun club to work in. Last Wednesday, I did a online showcase right from this very spot. The online showcases used to be very popular. They're not nearly as popular these days. During COVID and lockdown times, I got really into online open mics, showcases, things like that. Everything was shut down. You couldn't go out and do comedy. So I did a bunch of online stuff. I calculated it. I think I did something like 90 online open mics and 30 showcases. Well, in those contexts, I made some friends, and one guy still does a few online showcases. And he'll contact me every once in a while and say, "Hey, you want to do a show, online show?" And they pay decent. Obviously, the commute time is nothing. It's very convenient, especially during the middle of the week. If you have to work that day and then the next morning, yeah, I'll go do 15 minutes. So I did that. It wasn't great. They're never fun. They're hard. It feels like you have to just perform with no feedback. Sometimes you'll hear people laughing. Sometimes they'll have their videos on. Most of the time they don't. So it's just like performing into the void. And it's really hard. And that's not what you're used to. You're used to that crowd interaction. When you're on stage, one of my favorite things about performing is when you're on stage connecting with the audience, where you know your material so well that you're not thinking about what do I have to say, what's next. You know what you're going to do. You're very comfortable with your material, so you can really focus on the audience. I heard a quote, I don't know who said this, but I heard this a while ago, where at the beginning of your comedy career, you're thinking 90% about what you're going to say and 10% about how the audience is going to receive it. And then once you mature in your comedy career, you're thinking 10% about what you're going to say and 90% about the audience. And most of the time, if I'm on a showcase, if I'm doing well-worn material, that's where I live. I enjoy feeding off of the audience. Well, to do that in an online setting is basically not possible. On this show, we had the host, and then we had 3 comedians, me being one of them. So it's 4 people paid to be there. and 2 audience members, both of whom did not turn their video on. It's going to be a hard show. But there's a lot of hard shows in the comedy world. On Thursday, I was contacted late in the day, about 4 p.m., asking if I wanted to host at the brand new club, Laugh Louisville, if I wanted to host for Greg Fitzsimmons. And of course I did. But I was also booked. There was a time when I would really labor over these decisions. Like, should I try to get out of being booked and do something else? But now I've just decided if I'm booked, I'm booked. It's a good thing to be booked. If every time someone asks you to be part of their show, you're available, that means you're probably not very good anyway. And I was booked this weekend. I was booked at the Caravan, which is one of my favorite clubs in town. Really like them, like the owners, like what they do there. I was hosting this weekend. I don't love hosting. Hosting is hard. Hosting is work. When you host, you are the first comedian, and you have to break the crowd. That's the term I always think of it. So at the beginning, all of the crowd is just normal people. And we need to do something to them to make them an audience. As opposed to just a bunch of individuals, how do we make them one cohesive unit? We need to do that, but we also need to break the seal of laughter and get them laughing. So you have to come out hard, you have to come out punchy, you have to really try to get them going. And you don't have a whole lot of time. So there's a bunch of responsibility that the host has that the feature doesn't have. That's why 10 times out of 10, I would much rather be the feature. Now, the feature gets more time on stage. The feature gets more money. So those are good reasons to be the feature. But it's also a much easier job. You don't have to warm up the crowd. They're already an audience. If you have a good host, then it's a cakewalk. But hosting is hard. I've heard legend, I don't know this from experience, but I've heard legend that America and England, UK, whatever, they do this in kind of an opposite way. In America, it's very common for the least experienced guy to be the host. And it's also very common in England, so I've been told, for the most experienced guy to be the host. To me, that makes more sense. I think the host is the hardest job. You could argue the headliner is the hardest job. I understand he's doing the most time. I get that. But at that point, the crowd should be nice and warm. They should be ready for it. If you do a showcase where it's just a bunch of comedians, 5, 6 comedians, and no true headliner, well, then what's the hardest job on that? It's still the host. So it's one of those things where hosting is hard. And you might be thinking, hey, Jake, I've been listening to every episode of your podcast. I know you inside and out. I know you better than you know you. And weren't you headlining last week? Yes. This is how comedy goes. Last week, I headlined 2 shows. It was an absolute blast. Loved every minute of it. And then this weekend, I'm hosting. Next weekend, I'll be featuring. It's the nature of the beast. There's a lot to do. And You take work, you take stage time. It's all of it in pursuit of getting better. But this weekend I was at the Caravan, like I said. My friend Sean Smith, he was the headliner. I later found out that there was supposed to be a different guy who was headlining. I forgot his name, but he got a USO tour about 2 weeks ago. So he had to cancel kind of last minute. Hey, I can't come to the Caravan. The owners scrambled, threw in Sean Smith, said, hey, do you want to headline this weekend? He says yes. And I get thrown in. And the feature was Mike Fields. Now, Mike is a fun guy. I really like him. We have about as different of styles as you could possibly get. And we also look very similar. It's bizarre. We're both big, white, chubby guys with glasses. However, I am clean and a little goofy. He is dirty and a little mean. So it's weird to have us go back and forth. So I am the host, and then immediately I bring up Mike, and it's like, this is not the same guy. But it was a good time, and Sean absolutely killed it. One thing I didn't realize that Sean did or was planning to do was rap. He actually rapped 3 songs during his headline. I didn't realize he did that. I've seen him many, many times and consider him one of the best comedians in Louisville, and did not realize that he rapped. It was fun. I'm into it. The last show, he got a standing ovation, and that was also fun. So I hope he got paid well. Wish the best for him. Upcoming, I have a couple of fun shows coming up. On Thursday, I'm going down to Bowling Green, Kentucky, for a University of Kentucky corporate gig. Should be a good time. I'm bringing my buddy Drew Davis. He is a guy out of Nashville. He's a clean comedian. He used to be a youth pastor and is working on his new album. I think he's recording it in the next month or so. But we're going to do University of Kentucky. There is a question of like who's better, me or him. This happens a lot when comedians are near the same level. I would say that we're near the same level. He's probably got more years of experience than me. He's also a full-time comedian. I haven't quit my day job. But I'm headlining because I booked the show. Like, it's my show. The University of Kentucky contacted me. They didn't contact him. So I get to do the most time. I get to make the most money. That's the way it is. You might think that he's funnier than me. I don't really care. This is the way it's going to happen. I'm really excited about the weekend that's coming up, the 14th and 15th. I've been excited for this for a long, long time. When people would ask me what shows are coming up that you're excited about, I would point to this again and again because I'm going to the Comedy Catch in Chattanooga, and I'm going to feature for Jeff Allen. Jeff Allen is a very funny, well-known, also clean comedian. So I'm excited to be there. It's a A-list club. It's a fantastic room. And I'm very excited just to be part of it. I booked this show probably in November. So it's been a long time coming. But here it is, and I'm going to go down to Chattanooga and tell some jokes. I'm real excited about that. The way that I got this gig, I think, is interesting. So, comedy festivals in general are not awesome. And the only reason I say that is because comedians will apply to comedy festivals, and every comedy festival you have to pay for. So it's sometimes $15. I've seen comedy festivals as cheap as $10. I've seen comedy festivals as expensive as like $45. And then what it seems like from a comedian's perspective is the festival bookers just rake in all of this cash, and then they pick their favorites, and everybody else, yep, thanks for applying. And sometimes they'll send you a rejection email saying, hey, we didn't pick you. Sometimes they won't. I've applied to festivals and just not heard anything. So I guess I'm not in. But one festival that I did hear from, this was last year. It's called the Lookout Comedy Festival. It was in Chattanooga. I sent them my submission fee and, of course, a video. The guy in charge, he reached out to me and said, hey, just so you know, you're in. And I thought you'd like to know, we think that you were ranked in the top 8 of all the people that submitted. Like, well, that's nice. That's a nice little ego boost. And what that meant was he put me on a good show. And so the Lookout Comedy Festival, I'm not sure if they're going to have it again this year, but it was absolutely perfect. It was as good of a comedy festival as I could imagine. Now, I say that, and I'll also say the Vail Comedy Festival, also very, very good. Probably a little bit more fun because you get to stay in Vail and enjoy all of that stuff. But the Chattanooga Lookout Comedy Festival, exactly what I wanted. So Chattanooga is not too far away from Louisville. It's about 5 hours or so. And what they had set up was a showcase. Not a showcase. They had a panel discussion at noon where industry professionals would tell you about all of the tips and the tricks and whatever to help you get booked. And then I was on a couple of shows. I think it was at like 3, like 4:30, and then one at 6 or 7:30, something like that. And so I was able to wake up at my house, drive the 5 hours, get there before noon, hang out with comedians. There were some very fun comedians that I met there. Shane Torres. And participate in the panel discussion. Absolute blast. Learned a lot, took a lot of notes, really felt like I took valuable information from that piece of the festival. Performed at 2 shows. During that time, I met Sean, who still is the owner of the Blue Ridge Comedy Club in Bristol. Since then, I've been able to play Bristol twice. Really enjoyed both of my times there. But got to do 2 bar shows. The bar shows weren't great. They weren't awful, but they weren't great. They didn't really it was in the middle of the afternoon. It didn't go great. So I was a little disappointed. But then at the end of the night, I was able to feature at the Comedy Catch. And I was a little wary because earlier in the day, the owner of the Comedy Catch came up to me and said, "Hey, you're featuring tonight, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Well, we're going to do a guest set for this other comedian. So instead of doing 25 minutes, we're going to have you do 20." And it's never fun when they cut your time. But I'm like, fine. So I get up at the Comedy Catch, and the first comedian does okay. Not great. Doesn't really, he's the host. I don't think he really breaks the crowd. Now, it was a full house. They were there for comedy. They want to enjoy themselves. It just didn't quite do it. Then the guest who is taking part of my time, she gets up. They didn't really love her either. And I get up, and right from the beginning, the crowd loves me. Start to finish, they are excited. They are into it. Huge eruptions. Then I get off stage. The headliner comes up. He also does a really good job. We were kind of hanging out after the show, and several audience members came up and said, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much. You saved the show." I think it's a little dramatic, but it's also, I mean, it's nice to hear that they enjoyed themselves. The one thing that I really loved is as I was walking off stage. I walk off stage, I go turn off my phone that I'm recording with. I sit down, and the owner of the Comedy Catch comes straight to me before I sit down and says, "Hey, here's my information. Contact me immediately. I'm going to get you back to feature." So from the grand scheme of a comedy festival, you couldn't do any better than that. I got to perform 3 times. I learned a lot from this seminar. I got booked for a feature weekend at an A-list club. I am over the moon. So here is the culmination of all of that, where I am at the Comedy Catch this weekend, featuring for Jeff Allen. Also very interesting is tomorrow. So tomorrow's April 10th, and that is my improv comedy anniversary. My very first improv class I took in 2017. So at this point, it would be 6 years ago. I remember it pretty vividly because I was listening to a lot of podcasts. In one of the podcasts, the guy was talking about taking improv classes. I had no idea you could even take improv classes. I didn't know that was a thing. And I looked it up, and in Denver, where I was living, there were a couple of different improv clubs. There's 2 major improv clubs, the Bovine and Voodoo Comedy Playhouse. And I'm mulling it over. Do I want to spend money to take an improv class? Do I want to spend time to take an improv class? What if it's all goofy stuff? I don't know. And I was thinking this over and trying to decide between the 2 and if I would do it. And before that happened, I went to Haiti. So at the time I was a teacher, we took a week-long trip to Haiti with all of the kids, and I'm in Haiti. We're on the rooftop of this little schoolhouse where we're sleeping, and we hear some kind of odd music and noises and whatever. And our interpreter says, "Oh, that's a voodoo ritual that's happening over there." And I was like, "Voodoo? Well, Voodoo Comedy Playhouse in Denver. Maybe I'll take improv classes." That's my logic at the time. A little stupid, but that was my logic. So as soon as I got back to Denver, I bought improv class from Voodoo. I went there, absolutely loved it from the very start. I thought, man, I have found what I'm looking for. Immediately bought another class at Bovine. So I ended up doing, they have like 5 levels of improv classes. I ended up doing all 5 levels at both places. I ended up doing extra classes. I would go to festivals. I would go to like 2-day intensives. I took a different class that was focused on short form improv. I did so much improv and enjoyed all of it. Of course, I got lured by the siren song that is stand-up and haven't really looked back. But I'm looking back now and have enjoyed that improv was part of my career. And it's been 6 years. So I guess 6 years ago today, I would say I have done nothing comedy related. And then tomorrow I would say I started in improv. And then eventually made my way over to stand-up. I'm also thinking about doing impressions. Not a lot of comedians that do impressions, and the ones that do seem to do pretty well with them. I know of zero comedians that do impressions in my area. And I find impressions impressive. It's also challenging. So I'm thinking about doing impressions. Now, have I ever done impressions? No. But why would I let that stop me? How hard could it be? I'll practice it. Whatever. I'm going to tell you this story. I am listed with Gig Salad, which is a service that lists performers, entertainers, that sort of thing. I've been listed for many years now and have gotten a lot of gigs from it. This week, I've gotten booked a couple of times. I got booked for a dog pageant, to be the announcer for a dog pageant. And I also got booked at a retirement community, which is not the first retirement community that I've done. But one of my first, it might have even been my very first Gig Salad booking, was for a very unique event. So this lady contacts me, says she's having a Halloween party. A casino Halloween party. Okay. What do you need me for? Well, we go all out for our casino Halloween. Okay. We want you to be a roulette dealer and dress like a ghost. All right, I'm in. Now, At the time, I was a teacher. I taught many things, including some math. So the roulette wasn't too challenging. I could figure that out. I enjoy roulette. But the ghost thing, I don't know how to have makeup like a ghost. Whatever. I had a Shakespearean shirt, like this flowing, weird Shakespeare shirt. And I bought it because I saw this improv group called the Improvised Shakespeare Company. Honestly, the best improv I've ever seen was the improv of the Improvised Shakespeare Company. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to start a knockoff, of course. So I bought a Shakespearean shirt. I also bought one for my buddy, Steven. And I'm like, let's do this thing. And he was into it. So I had this shirt. I made my wife make me up like a ghost. I had corduroy pants on. I rolled them up, and I had long white socks. So I looked a little bit like I was wearing knickers, I guess. I don't know. And I showed up. Here I am. I'm the ghost. And the lady says, hey, that's great. Here's where the roulette wheel is, but we're not going to start with roulette. We're going to start with just drinking. So, do you mind being the bartender? I said, sure. Now, I have never been a bartender, nor have I ever drank. I know nothing. I've never ordered from a bartender, except like chicken fingers. Like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. If they wanted me to open a bottle of beer, I think I probably could do that. That's about it. But I was so excited. This is my first gig. They're going to pay me a couple $100. So that's so silly. So I'm standing there in their kitchen. People are filing in. Everybody's in costumes. And sometimes they wanted shots, which I assumed was just like liquor in a little glass. So I think I got that one right. And then people ordered gin and tonic. And I had in front of me gin and tonic. I'm like, oh, okay. This can't be that hard. Let's put them together. So I put in a glass half gin and half tonic. I don't know if that was right. It seemed a little strong to me, but I didn't taste it. Whatever. I wasn't there for the bartending. I had no idea. Give me like a crash course. Give me an idea of how to do this thing. Well, we go down to the basement where the roulette wheel is. And I'm doing the roulette. I'm kind of teaching people how to play roulette and actually doing it. And we're having a good time. People are throwing down money. They're cashing out. They're doing all this stuff. And it was a good time. One lady does not know how to play. Just puts like a huge stack on one number. Spin it. Of course it hits that number. So she is by far the winner. And the rules of this house game roulette were the person with the most chips at the end of my time there, my contracted time there, wins all the money. So there's no way she's getting beat at this point. I am dealing the roulette. The owner comes up and says, "Hey, if we give you a little more cash, do you mind staying for an extra half hour?" I'm like, "No, I'm having a great time." And they paid me extra. The lady who ended up winning, she tipped me very well. I walked out of there with way too much money for the amount of value that I added. Maybe it was because I made the drinks too strong. I don't know. But I enjoyed it. Well, I'm going to talk about the books that I've been reading. I've been reading a decent amount, not as much as I'd really like, but reading consistently. This week I had a lot of things to do at work where I don't usually have as much like really pressing things to do. I also was kind of struggling with some low energy. I'll talk about that in a second, but I still did do some reading. One book that I finished this week was No Easy Day by Mark Owen. So this is the second book I've read from a Navy SEAL. I don't know why I'm reading Navy SEAL books, but they're kind of fun. I'm not a Navy SEAL. I would be I'm like a Navy walrus. I don't know. But there's no way I could ever pass Navy SEAL boot camp or whatever. But I like the idea of, okay, these guys go out there and they challenge themselves. Oh, hoorah, all that stuff. And it makes me feel like, okay, I need to go challenge myself and do things that are hard. And of course, the things that I mean are hard are like writing my journal and blog. You know, it's not as serious. But this No Easy Day, he talks a little bit about that. He talks a lot about bin Laden. So he was part of the team that killed bin Laden. And I had no idea how intense all of it was, what happened. I do now. My goodness. They went after the dude. It was a thing. About halfway through the book, I'm like, oh, he's just going to talk about bin Laden for the next, for the rest of the book. And the mission that killed him. I'm like, I'm not really into this. But I also wanted to finish the book because I want to read 100 books over the course of the year. So I'm like, let's keep going. So it was interesting. Also, not that interesting. I don't know. One of the books that I am reading that I'm really enjoying is Delete That by John Crist. I mentioned that last week. I'm still reading it. I've read several more chapters. He's talking a lot about his comedy journey. And it's fun because he's mentioning things like not only church stuff, which I relate to, but also starting comedy in Denver. And I'm relating to that too. So it's very interesting. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it to the point that I'm not reading it very fast. I do this a lot where if I'm really enjoying a book, I slow down and I'll read one chapter and then I'll think about that chapter. and then I'll come back and then I'll read another chapter. As opposed to if I'm like kind of enjoying a book, I'll bust through 7 chapters in one sitting. Or a fiction book where there is nothing to like really think about, I'll just mow down 100 pages without even thinking about it. But a book like this, I'm slowing down. Another book that I'm slowing down on, I mentioned it last week, was The Motivation Myth by Jeff Hayden. It's interesting. A lot of the business books that I'm reading use comedians as examples. For example, the book So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, not only does the title come from a comedian, it comes from Steve Martin. Steve Martin says, how do you become a good comedian? Will be so good that they can't ignore you. Not only does he do that, but Cal Newport also uses Chris Rock as an example of tiny bets, is what he was calling it, where Chris Rock would write a bunch of material, go to a comedy club, try out the material, see if it works, and only use the stuff that's good. Every comedian knows that, but he's using that as an example of tiny bets. Well, this book, The Motivation Myth by Jeff Hayden, he uses Seinfeld as an example. The point he's trying to make is some successful people will have a big goal and then completely forget that goal and work a process to get that goal. Jerry Seinfeld wants to be a good comedian, forgets the goal of being a good comedian, and just works the process of writing every day. Gets a big year calendar, and when every day he writes, puts a big X on that day. And wants to make sure that there's an X on every single day all year. Eventually you'll have, several X's in a row, and you want to not break the chain. And I've heard this thing from Seinfeld before. But it is an important lesson of how do you be a good comedian? Well, you need to write. You need to have quality through quantity. So, even though I've heard this before, I did order a wall calendar. And I'm going to start marking the days where I write, and really committing to the process. One thing I'll mention with the book So Good They Can't Ignore You is he mentions this idea of deliberate practice. And this is, again, something that I've heard many times in the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. She talks about deliberate practice. A lot of people talk about this concept, deliberate practice. How do you get really good at something? Well, you have to do deliberate practice. And it is the idea of stretching yourselves beyond your current ability. And the confusing thing is, how do you do deliberate practice as a comedian? What does deliberate practice look like? Is it open mics? Is it writing alone? Is it trying new things? I don't even know. So it's a little confusing. I am thinking through it. I've got some ideas. I'm going to go through this. And then, of course, another concept that's kind of rattling around in my brain is from The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. He talks about this concept of resistance. And whenever you are trying to create, you'll come against this force of resistance. So whenever you feel resistance, you know you're going in the right direction. Which makes me think, okay, let me think through this deliberate practice idea, and which one of these ideas, which one of these activities do I not really want to do? Which activity do I intellectually think would benefit me, but emotionally or motivationally I don't want to do? That's the one I should do. So maybe the Navy SEAL stuff would help me in that endeavor. Talking about diet, I have been experimenting with some fasting. The one thing I will say about fasting, I enjoy fasting. I like the simplicity of fasting. I like the challenge of fasting. The one thing that I'll say about it is there is a challenge for me personally, at least, in fasting of dehydration. What seems to happen, and I've read a lot about it, is your body, because you're not consuming food, your body will produce more urine and you'll lose a lot of water weight. In losing the water weight, you also lose a lot of electrolytes. And because you're not eating anything that has electrolytes in it, basically salt, you're not replenishing that. And so you'll get dehydrated. Even if you're drinking a ton of water, that doesn't really matter because you need the electrolytes. And what you'll experience, or what I've experienced at least, is a little bit of lightheadedness, some headaches every once in a while, and a little bit of lethargy. So I'm not as gung-ho all the time. However, I researched this and was seeing what can I do to fix this. And there's a lot of things. You can take salt, basically just swallow salt. I've been doing that a little bit, which feels goofy. But there's this other product out there called Fasting Drops, which is basically an electrolyte solution you add to whatever liquid you're drinking, mostly water, and down that, and there you go. So I've been doing that only for about a day and a half because it took a while. I ordered it on Amazon. I did that for about a day and a half and instantly feeling better. So hopefully I'll have a lot of good things to say and have a lot more energy. I've been told that fasting comes with energy, with focus, with things like that. The ancient Greeks would fast in order to produce big thoughts. Maybe I can do it to produce big laughs. I don't know. Or maybe I'll just have Little Caesars later today. I have not had the opportunity to try out the half piece of gum bit. I basically didn't go to any open mics this week. I was booked. I did 5 shows at the Caravan. I did 1 online open mic or online showcase. Didn't have an opportunity to do that bit. I'm excited to do it. I want to write it, want to rewrite it, want to get it nice and juicy, and come back for it. A new bit that I want to write is about being a philosophy major. There's this joke, and I wouldn't say this in my joke. This is not my joke. But there's this joke that I like, and it is, how do you get a philosophy major off your porch? And the answer is you pay for the pizza. So the idea is the philosophy majors think a lot of themselves. It's a hard degree. Not everybody can do it. Most people are not even interested in it. There's this nobility in being a philosophy major. However, there is this impracticality in being a philosophy major. Like, yeah, you're a philosophy major, but no one's hiring. How many philosophy majors do you know that are using the philosophy degree? I know I'm not using mine. So I want to poke fun at that. I'd like to make some inside jokes about philosophy. So I'm working through that because there are some useless degrees out there. I remember when I was going to college, a lot of my friends were doing things like business, marketing. My wife got a job. Her major was graphic design. A lot of people are doing like teaching degrees and blah blah blah. All of them very practical, and I'm over here like, what is practicality? And being all philosophical, and also looking down on those people, which is stupid because they got jobs and I didn't. So I like that idea of smart people choosing a dumb major. So I'm going to work on that this week. Anyway, it's been a lot of fun. Hope you're enjoying it. Send me a comment of anything, any questions you have if you're enjoying it as well. But take care. See you later. Happy Easter.